Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is almost like a Baptist church. Maybe I think this Arctic Roadshow is becoming kind of revival meetings in different places. To some extent, it's presumptuous of me to agree to give what is formally called a keynote here among this very well-informed and distinguished gathering, and especially following the extensive and fascinating discussions we had yesterday. I remarked to Jane Harman after the meetings were over that the sessions yesterday demonstrated very clearly that the dialogue on Arctic issues is now a traditional global affairs discussion. Many of you know that there has been this kind of division in the foreign policy establishment of Europe and the United States. That on one hand there were specific niche issues, and then on the other were the more fascinating upfront global affairs or international issues or even strategic studies. And the Arctic traditionally was considered to be a niche affair. And then the more serious guys talked about the global affairs and the security issues. But yesterday demonstrated very thoroughly that that model no longer applies. That every aspect of the traditional concerns of global affairs now applies to the Arctic dialogue. And if one doubted that conclusion, one only had to listen thoroughly to the Russian participation and how they presented the Russian position within the framework of Russia's relationship with the rest of the world. But also to the Arctic ambassador of Korea and the representative of Singapore, especially relating how in a remarkably short time Korea has become a formidable Arctic partner. I also hope, and I say this very clearly to the Russian participation in this forum, I hope they will take back with them to Moscow and the different Russian regions in the Arctic that what happened here in Washington was a deliberate, genuine, serious, and extensive attempt to bring the dialogue and the focus on Russia and the United States into the more proper, traditional, more truthful basis of the extraordinary positive results of the Russian-American cooperation in the Arctic. When we launched this idea some months ago to have an Arctic Circle Wilson Center Forum in Washington on Russia and the United States at the height of the media circus and the congressional circus and other circuses around in this town, we were met, and I'm always honest and straightforward with whomever I speak to, whether it's my American friends or my Russian friends. We were met with some kind of, perhaps naturally, some kind of skepticism from the representative of the Russian Federation. What in hell was our motive? Was there some kind of a plot? Or were they going to be once again drawn into this circus that is regularly on show in what our good friend Jane Harman now calls the entertainment capital of the world? But I hope you have seen yesterday and will see today that on behalf of the Wilson Center and the Arctic Circle, this is a genuine, extensive, and ongoing, future-looking attempt to maintain a constructive dialogue and cooperation with Russia. And let's not forget that when the Arctic Circle was created 4 years ago, it's quite remarkable, it's only 4 years ago since we created it, and it has in those short few years become one of the largest international platforms, not just on the Arctic, but on international issues. You can go all over Europe every year, and you only find in Davos in January and in Reykjavik in October political, business, technical, scientific assemblies of the kind that the World Economic Forum in Davos in January and the Arctic Circle in Iceland in October demonstrates. There's no such gathering anywhere in Southern Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Sweden, Finland, Norway, you name it. And I think that reflects not just the organizational capability of some of us who have been involved in this effort, but it demonstrates the international engagement in the Arctic. But when it was founded, and I make this very clear here this morning, in addition to my own role and a few others in it, it was a joint American-Russian effort. And I hope that's not forgotten in Moscow. It was a joint American-Russian effort. Alice Rokov, me Treadwell, Lisa McCoskey, and some others here in the United States who had been involved in Arctic issues for a long time and saw the need, together with me, to create a new platform of a larger scale, became involved in this, and my good friend Arturo Siliganov, and also various representatives of the Russian Foreign Ministry were also involved. I traveled to Moscow in November, the year before we launched the Arctic Circle, for a dialogue with the Russian Foreign Ministry on this idea. It was low-key, very open dialogue on what were our intentions. So 6 months before we announced the creation of the Arctic Circle at the National Press Club here in Washington, we had these consultations in Moscow. And the reason why we did it was that we were not only optimists, but we are also realists. That's why I have survived in this cruel business for so long, despite my optimism. That without Russia positive engagement, there was no point in this exercise. And that joint effort is symbolized that on the honorary board of the Arctic Circle from the very beginning, Senator Lisa McCoskey and Arturo Siliganov sit side by side in the honorary board of the Arctic Circle. So to my Russian friends, I say this very clearly. This is your platform as well. This is not just us inviting you to come and join us. This is your platform as well, as it has been for our American friends. It's your platform. Although the Arctic Circle has the Assemblies in Iceland every October and the Secretariat is based there, it's an international platform, led by a constructive gathering of prominent American, Russian, and other partners in the Arctic. And in the last 3 or 4 years, being joined by leading representatives of China, Korea, Japan, Singapore, France, Germany, United Kingdom, and others. President Xi Jinping of China sent a formal delegation to the Arctic Circle Assembly 2 years ago. Chancellor Angela Merkel did the same. President François Hollande came and made his major speech prior to the Paris climate negotiations. And I could go on long into the afternoon to list other evidences of this. So as we continue from this forum here, co-hosted by the Wilson Center. I hope we can maintain the sincerity, the constructiveness of what happened yesterday and what will happen today. And I thank the Russian participants for the greetings they brought from our good friend Arturo Siliganov. And please convey to him when you get back to Moscow that this was a great experience. And next time when we do this, we want to see more of you. And of course, at the Arctic Circle Assembly in October in Reykjavik, we will continue this dialogue. This is a train that moves from one station to another. It's not a question of coming together, ending a particular forum, and then go back home and that's the end of it. No. Each stop is a part of a journey. Like when Alice and me and Mike and many others who are here attended the Arctic Territorial Dialogue Conference in Arkhangelsk in March. I am the only person, apart from President Putin. No, in fact, I am probably more than President Putin. The only person who has attended all the Arctic Territorial Dialogue conferences in Russia, either as head of state or my country as a former head of state, because once when President Putin attended, he was a prime minister, not the president of the Russian of the Russian Federation. So I had a reasonable basis to conclude in March in Arkhangelsk that what we witnessed there was a major scaling up on behalf of Russia on the importance of the Arctic. When I first discussed the Arctic with President Putin on my state visit to Russia in 2002, he said to me, yeah, that's true, but you talk to the governors about that. It was not his portfolio. He referred me to the governor, and I actually did. I traveled to Yammer-Nemetz and other parts of Russia in that state visit. So when we came to Arkhangelsk and saw the high-level political engagement by the Russian leadership and by all the major Russian companies, and the great message that that carried for the economic future of Russia and its engagement with the rest of the world, it was like the show had moved from the small local theater up to the Grand Opera House. That was the fundamental change that had taken place. And I hope it was also noted in Moscow that two other heads of state of Arctic states attended, the President of Finland and my successor, the President of Iceland. And these are the two countries that now, with Finland holding the chair of the Arctic Council and then Iceland taking over in 2 years' time, will precede Russia in the chairmanship of the Arctic Council. But we also had 3 foreign ministers from Nordic NATO countries attending the Arkhangelsk gathering. So I think what happened in Arkhangelsk and what is happening here is a very clear, realistic demonstration that not only is it possible, but it's very rewarding to facilitate this ongoing dialogue with Russia and the rest of us in the Arctic. And it is important to demonstrate that, because there is so much hype and so much misleading stories around. But what we also saw yesterday was a multiple evidence of how, in terms of global economic progress, the transformation of the global economy, the Arctic has become an absolutely crucial territory. When the ambassador of Korea described how Korea is already building the vessels to execute the transport from northern Arctic parts of Russia to both Asia and Europe, and Korea sees its role in the Russian, Arctic, Asian, European shipping as a major contribution to the Arctic future, we should also be reminded that South Korea is a key U.S. ally in Asia. And here we have one of the preeminent American allies in Asia demonstrating here in Washington not only their vision but their concrete plans in shipbuilding and transport and economic engagement with respect to the Arctic. The representative of Singapore referred to the role of capital in the future, economic future of the Arctic. It's kind of paradoxical that Singapore has become a leading builder, together with Finland, of Arctic infrastructure. It's almost a crazy notion that Singapore is taking on this role, but it's true. At the Arctic Circle Assembly in Reykjavik last year, the CEO of Capital traveled to Iceland to present in a particular session the vision and the role and the engagement of Capital in these facilities and infrastructures building in the Arctic. I could go on here this morning giving you concrete examples of major enterprises and global companies from Asia now already having the Arctic as a major part of their business strategy. And these are no small players. In December of last year, Dagfinnur, the CEO of Arctic Circle, and I attended in Shanghai a meeting with the CEO of COSCO, not only the largest shipping company in China, but the largest shipping company in the world. And he presented the extensive Arctic strategy for COSCO shipping in the 21st century. And yesterday, I was told by my good friend, the chairman of the Economic Council, that COSCO had called Finland to say they now want a meeting in Finland on Arctic shipping. And why is that? The answer is what I reported at the end of the sessions yesterday, when I got on this remarkable tool of communication that we have been given by Apple. The monumental, I call it mega news for the Arctic, that on the 20th of June, the State Council of China announced that now the Arctic sea routes have become an integral part of the One Belt, One Road investment strategy of China for the 21st century. This was not the case when I was there in December. In my various meetings with Chinese authorities and companies as representatives, I had to urge them to talk about what I called One Belt, One Road Plus. And the plus was the Arctic. And a month ago, we engaged in similar discussions in China, but the end result is that we now have a formal document stating the official policy of President Xi Jinping on China, that the evolution of the Arctic sea routes have become an integral part of the One Road, One Belt, and thereby of the investment structure that the new Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, as well as the One Belt, One Road Investment Fund, will devote their formidable investment resources to in the coming years. So no wonder COSCO called Helsinki yesterday and said, let's have a meeting. I hope the Finns remember to invite some of us also to that meeting.
Absolutely.
But my friends, this is no small item, because the One Belt, One Road is the most extensive policy around for the complete transformation of the global transport and economic system, linking Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas now through the Arctic sea routes in a completely new way. And to have that formal announcement backed up, which is also a part of the report which I read last night, extensive paragraphs of what this involves for the engagement of China in Arctic investment, Arctic infrastructure, Arctic renewable energy buildup, Arctic dialogue, as well as the involvement in what they call the prominent international Arctic-related forums, is, for all of us, yet another indication, in addition to the presentation by the ambassador of Korea and the representative of Singapore yesterday, that we have now entered a completely new world. And we better scale up in order to be able to deal with that challenge that the combined effort of China and other Asian partners, as well as the leading European economies, will have on the Arctic. And that is why this cooperation between the Wilson Center and the Arctic Circle is so important. We all know that in the Arctic Council, the observer states are not allowed to speak. As was highlighted by my good friend, the late Michel Rocard, former Prime Minister of France, who was appointed by Sarkozy as the representative of the President of France to the Arctic and then reappointed by President Hollande, and had attended numerous meetings ministerial meetings of the Arctic Council and other meetings of the Arctic Council, but never been allowed to speak. And he complained memorably in Paris 3 years ago with a sentence I will never forget, but which highlights this problem. France is not accustomed not to be allowed to speak. So they need other platforms to speak, to maintain this dialogue. And that is why the Arctic Circle has served formal delegations from China, Japan, Korea, France, Germany, Britain, and now in October, in addition, also India and Poland, as well as others. And now, after the United States has handed over a successful chairmanship of the Arctic Council, it's important that here in Washington we have a platform, an institution, and an engine room, I will call it, to maintain this dialogue on behalf of this crowd in this town, whether it's the policy institutes, the departments, the House, the Senate, or others. And that is why I hope that this cooperation between us in the Arctic Circle and the Wilson Center will continue. And I am absolutely convinced that it actually will. And we are prepared on our part in the Arctic Circle to continue that cooperation by hosting regularly here in Washington, in cooperation with the Wilson Center, similar forums. Perhaps not on just Russia and the United States, but other aspects. But also allowing the observer states like China, Korea, Japan, and others, as well as the European countries, to come to Washington, invited by us, and have a dialogue with the leading policymakers and the political and economic leadership of this country through this facility. And that's why it's so important that in the Chinese statement, they phrase it in the way they do in Arctic-related international fora. Because on their part, that is their invitation to us to also facilitate that dialogue. So all of this, of course, in addition to the fascinating description of the scientific cooperation we listened to yesterday, which, by the way, reminds all of us that Russia and US cooperation in the Arctic is deeply rooted in the scientific cooperation, as well as the human dialogue between the people in Alaska, Chukotka, and other parts of Russia. And therefore, as a conclusion here this morning, I want to thank the Wilson Center again for having entered this so constructively in such a formidable way. And I hope this will be a beginning of a very constructive cooperation involving all the other Arctic players. And I also finally say to my Russian friends, bring back to Moscow the constructive report of how successful this exercise has been. And there is no risk for Russia to continue in this dialogue, either in October in Reykjavik, as I know Russia will. We've already invited the governor of Murmansk and various other representatives of Russia to attend, but also here in Washington, in what our good friend Jane Harman has called the entertainment capital of the world, but also is the power center of the global community. So thank you very much.